Hello and welcome back to another Hitfilm tutorial. In today's Hitfilm tutorial I'm going to be showing you how you can create the time door portal thing that is used by the TVA to travel through time. As this is quite a long tutorial, I have set up chapters so you can go through and find the part of the tutorial you want to watch. What you'll need to create this effect: firstly, Hitfilm Pro. The reason why you can't use Hitfilm Express for this is because we need chromatic aberration and the inner glow effect, as well as Mocha and also the 3D model import feature. What you'll need footage-wise is some footage of you walking through the portal, which that is just you taking a step forward from one point to the final point, and then in my footage I just look around, but you could do whatever you want after that. And you'll also need a clean plate. My clean plate is actually just an image, which I took before I walked into the shop. You'll also need a 3D model that I've included in the description for free, so you can download that from my Google Drive. It's a very simple model that you'll see in a minute. Let's get on with this tutorial. First thing that you need to do is import the 3D model that I've included down below. So once you've downloaded it and saved it wherever you want on your computer, go over to Import, to the arrow next to it, and select 3D model. Then locate your 3D model wherever you saved it. It will be called Time Door. And then select Open. Then you'll see the Time Door. It's a very basic model. Didn't take long to make. And all you need to do here is turn the shininess down to 1. And then hit OK. Then drag this onto the timeline. I'd then recommend creating a new point, and then setting this point to 3D, and then renaming it to Control. Then you want to parent the time door model layer to the control point. Then you want to use the control point to position the time door where you want to in the frame. It doesn't have to be perfect because this can be changed very easily later on. It's more you want to kind of start blocking the scene out. If you want to look at where your feet land as you step through the portal, then just play through your footage and make sure the time door is behind your feet. For when I positioned mine, I decreased the opacity, but that's completely up to you as to how you want to do it. And then I'm going to go into the models and open up the time door into the transform. And then I'm going to find the point where I want the time door to open or close. To do this, I'm going to look at the footage mainly, and then just work out the point where I step through, and have that as my, well, the portal will be closing by that point, because the portal closes almost as soon as the person either walks through or walks out of it. But you can completely decide this for yourself. But I need the portal to be fully open by the time I start walking through it. So I'm going to go back to before I start walking through it, go back into the controls and the transform settings. Then I'm going to click on the chain for the scale to disconnect everything and unlink all of the scales so you can change different scale properties without it affecting too much. And then on the first frame where I want the portal to be opening, I'm going to set everything to 0. Make sure that the chain is clicked so it's disconnected. And then I'm going to start keyframing for the scale. Then I'm going to move ahead by 3 frames. And now I'm going to change the scale for the X to 100, the Y scale to 5, not 50, and then the Z scale to 100 as well. And if I just reactivate the time door, you will see that's created like a lot thinner of a rectangle. And then I'm going to advance another 2 frames, and then I'm going to set all of the properties to 100. And this has now created a cool opening portal effect. And then I'm going to select all of these keyframes and set them to smooth, so that the animation is a lot smoother. Then when I fully stepped through the portal, I now want the portal to be closing. So on the first frame where I want the portal to begin closing, I'm going to add a keyframe for all of the properties at 100. Then I'm going to advance by 2 frames, and then change the Y scale to 5. This will then shrink it back down, then advance by another 3 frames, and then set everything to 0. And also change these frames to smooth. And then if you play through, you will see that your portal opens and then closes. It's quite a quick animation, but you could change it to open however you want it to. It doesn't have to be those exact properties, but they were the ones that I found worked quite well for me. Once you've done that, you need to trim down your time door layer, just because that makes it easier to be able to see what's going on, instead of there being lots of layers that are just there all the way through. So you want to trim it before the animation starts and after the animation ends. And this will just help you see how much you need to do while the time door is there. Which brings me on to the next point. You need to duplicate your clean plate and then shrink it down to being the same length as your time door. Then you want to hide the time door layer. On this duplicate of the clean plate, you want to add heat distortion. And then you want to change the settings to be how you want them to look, but I'm going to tell you some settings that I found that worked quite well. Firstly, the scale at 100 pixels, then the distortion was set to 23, then the diffusion bias I set to being -1, then I left the diffusion strength as it was. Then under the animation settings, I changed the wind speed from 100 pixels to 5 pixels. This really slows down the animation of the diffusion. The next effect that you want to add is a diffuse. I found that something around 46 for the radius worked quite well, and then I left the opacity as it was. Next effect is very important to get the look of the world through the portal right, and that is chromatic aberration. You'll see it in all of the shots that show the portal in the show, because it's an amazing effect. I then changed the distance from the chromatic aberration to 10% to really make it stand out. Next effect that you want to add is a lens blur. Then if you just drag and drop this onto the layer underneath the chromatic aberration, then you might want to reduce the radius because this is very intense. I changed it just down to 25, so it's ever so slightly more subtle. And then the final effect is a tint. You then need to change the colours for the map black to and map white to give it more of that orangey gold tint. I found that changing the map black to 143 to 113 to 43 and the map white to 181, 106 and finally 30. I found that worked quite well. And then the final effect to add to this is a set matte. Drag and drop this below the tint, and then you want to change the source layer to the time door and then leave everything else as it is. As you can see, we now have the effect through the time door and the distortion of what is behind. You might then want to rename your clean plate duplicate to something like Distortion, just to help you keep things organised. Next up is the border for the time door. To add this, make the time door visible again. We'll be using a Find Edges effect to generate the outer border because I found that that worked quite well. So in the Effects tab, just find Edges. But the problem here is that you only get the edge around the outside of the time door, and you don't get one down here where there should be one. So to fix this, create a new light. Then you want to reposition this light so that then you see all of the edges. To actually be able to see the distortion that we just created, right click on the time door and change the blend mode to add. And now you can see that we have the outside, we have the borderlines for the time door over the top of the distortion effects that we added. Then to this time door layer, we need to add a glow. You can play around with this to get a completely different look if you want to, but I found that having a fairly low radius and a fairly high intensity worked quite well, because it thickened the borders of the lines. Next thing I added was a tint. So you want to search in the Effects tab for tint. And from here, you just want to make it so that the white is more of a yellow colour. So I found the exact numbers I used were 173, 128, and 96. And then I increased the amount to being 100%. Next thing you want to do is add a diffuse. So search in the Effects tab for diffuse. Drag and drop this onto the time door layer and leave that as it is. This just helps soften out the edges ever so slightly. Then you want to add a lens blur. Once again, this helps to soften out the effect and make it look more natural and realistic. Apart from the default radius is far too high for what we want, so you just want to decrease this down. I found that something around 5 worked quite nicely, but you could choose something different. And the final effect you want to add to this is a heat distortion. Drag and drop this onto the time door plane, and then change the scale to something around 130. That's just what I found that worked quite well. And then the distortion to something a lot smaller, 3, because we still want it to have its straight lines. We don't necessarily want to completely morph the shape of these outline edges. Then I decrease the diffusion bias down to 10, and then the diffusion strength also down to 10. And now we've created the outline border for the portal. The next thing to do is add a bit more detail to the inside of the portal, and this is actually not too hard to do. You want to create a new plane. Set this plane to being black, and then call it something that makes sense. As we're going to be using fractal noise on this plane, I decided to call it fractal plane. I'm going to drag this down below the time door, and then I'm going to shrink it and cut it in so that it is the same length as the time door and the distortion. On this fractal plane, you need to add a set matte. We're going to be using this set matte to keep the plane contained within the time door. So for source layer, select time door, and then leave everything else the same. Now we need to create the inner glow that is visible in the portals in the show. So I'm going to add an inner glow and just drag this onto the fractal plane. Now it's time to change a bunch of settings again. Once again, you want to create a nice glowing orangey yellow color if you want to match that scene in the show. So I found that the the RGB values of 165, 126, and 86 worked quite well. And then for the opacity, I changed that to 0.6 just to make it slightly more visible. Then I changed the size to 100. This will really increase the size of that inner glow. And then the spread to 58. You could just leave that as the same, but I found that worked quite well. Next up is some fractal noise. First thing I'm going to do with this is change the blend mode to hard light. Then, under the transform settings, you want to go into axis scaling and then decrease the X axis scaling, just to create some more vertical streaks. I found that something around 8 worked quite well, but of course play around with it and do as you want with that. You also need to change the color 2 value. I found that if you changed it to 235, 194, and 164, then you get some quite nice orangey red. And then if you change the exposure to -5, then I changed the offset to 0.42, and now we have some more detail within the portal. And then the final thing you need to do is go to the start of the fractal plane and begin keyframing, and then a bit later on change this. You don't want it to have too much motion because it's only meant to be subtle. But I found that something around 3 worked quite well. Then finally, change the blend mode of this layer to add. And also maybe just decrease the opacity of this to make it even more subtle, because it's only meant to be a couple of subtle details. If you wanted to, you could add some glows to this and kind of use the per channel intensity to make them head slightly more towards the red and green, giving them a slightly more orangey yellow colour. We've now got all of the actual portal elements sorted, so now we're just going to be moving on to making someone walk through the portal. So if you did only want to know how to create the look of the portal, then you can go do whatever you want with it now. What you want to do is duplicate your base footage. This is where you have yourself walking, and then drag this above all of the effects. Then narrow this down to where the portal opens and closes. Then you want to select Make Composite Shot, and then call this Human Roto. And then just leave everything as it is, and select OK. Then in here we now need to cut the character out. You could use the masking tools inside of Hitfilm Pro, but I'm going to use Mocha. If you've never used Mocha before, then I definitely recommend finding a tutorial on how to use it, because that will help you a lot. Basically what you want to do is isolate the section of the character that you want to track, draw an X-spline layer around it, and then track forwards, and then adjust the points on the track later on, and then when you save it out, then you can apply the matte. But I'll be showing you that. I've already done a roto inside of Mocha, but so I'm going to be using that. But that could take you some time, so maybe put some music on and get that done. As you can see, here is my rotoed copy of me. All I have on here is the Mocha Hitfilm effect. And basically what you do to actually apply the matte is go into the matte options and then click Apply Matte. And this will then apply all of the X-spline layers and use them as a mask. If you wanted to soften the edge of your roto, then you can use the feather control to change it to something around 0.25 is what I found worked quite well, but play around with that and get a look that you like. Because I'm not using the human roto comp, I'm just going to delete that and use the walking me masked that I created. So now you're walking over the top of the time door that you created, which is good. If you notice that your Find Edges effect is not finding the edges, that is probably because you put stuff in between the time door and the light. So you might just want to make sure that the light has been moved to be next to the time door. I just noticed that was a problem because I added the walking me composite. And now we need to do some more masking. But this masking is a lot simpler than the previous masking that we were doing. And basically what we're going to be doing is revealing the character while the portal is open, as if they're stepping through it. So basically all you need to do for this is create a mask and then reveal your character as they slowly walk through the portal. So I'd recommend skipping ahead to where the portal is fully open. Then what you want to do is animate the path. Once you've done this, you will then want to feather the mask. And I also found that smoothing the mask out with the roundness control also made it a bit neater. You might then find that your portal is not quite in the right place, so then you can use the controls once again to just reposition it. You then need to set the end of the clean plate to start a couple of frames after you started walking through the portal. Something that helps to increase the realism of this effect is by duplicating the roto comp of you and then inverting the mask. This will then mean that anything that wasn't masked out is then put back in. But then what we want to do is go into the distortion and then select all of the effects in there, copy them, and then paste them onto your duplicate copy with the inverted comp. This will then go all weird, and you'll need to sort this out. And it's very simple actually to sort out, and it's just with the set matte. You need to change the blend to subtract and then invert. And then after you've done this, you will see that you have a diffused copy of yourself inside of the time door. I then found that changing the blend mode of this to soft light, and also changing the opacity to something around 50, made it slightly more subtle, but you can still see the rest of you is going to be going through the portal. It just adds an extra bit of detail if anyone's actually looking at it. And then this is the effect, but after a final colour grade, it looks so much cooler, and it looks exactly like this. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, then please leave a like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or future tutorial suggestions or requests, then please feel free to comment them down below, and I'll try to get back to you. And if it's a tutorial request, then I'll try and make that tutorial. If you did like, once again, please leave a like and subscribe, as that would be greatly appreciated. See you next time. Goodbye.